About a month ago, I made a video comparing the colors from the CCD censored Nikon D200 to the Leica M8 and M9. And everyone in the comment section of that video said that while the D200 sensor was good and the colors were great, it was nothing compared to the sensor in a different Nikon DSLR, the D700. The Nikon D700 features a 12 megapixel CMOS sensor, and it was released all the way back in 2008. And online, everyone raves about just how unbelievable the colors are in this camera. I had to find out for myself. I mean, could this camera really be all that special? The D700 was the baby brother to this camera, the Nikon D3. Oh yeah, I got one of these as well. So they share the same sensor, autofocus performance, and overall functionality, but this D3 really makes the D700 look like a toy by comparison. It's heavy and built so well that I think you could genuinely use this as a self-defense weapon. But despite sharing the same excellent sensor, reports online say that the D3 colors are a little bit more flat than the D700. Well, I'm going to test that out and compare them side by side later on, but before we get into it though, be sure to subscribe to see more great photography content. So despite being less substantial, the D700 has a few other tricks up its sleeve that make it probably the better camera for most people, but I'll elaborate on that in just a second. Now, to give these cameras a proper test, I decided to take the D700 on 2 road trips and the D3 on 1. To start with, I drove down to Sorrento, where I used this D700 side by side with my new Nikon ZF, and I found out that what everyone was saying was true. The colors really are truly special. But it's not just the colors, it's the overall shooting experience. The handling and the performance of this camera is simply superb. So during my trip down to Sorrento, I found myself pretty much only using this D700, with my shiny new ZF being left in my bag, as I just enjoyed shooting with this ancient DSLR so much more. I mean, I think there is something about a big, bright OVF and the excellent ergonomics that make the D700 one of the most enjoyable shooting experiences I've had in recent memory. And if you guys have ever seen my retrospective video on the Canon 5D Mark III, which I'll link below as well, I sort of learned photography on a full frame DSLR. I'm very, very comfortable with using them. And while there are definitely a whole host of massive advantages to mirrorless cameras, in terms of sheer shooting experience, there's nothing that really beats a DSLR. I absolutely love these. I think if you've just started photography and you never had a chance to try out a DSLR, definitely give it a go because you would be surprised at just how great this really is. So what about the output though? Is this D3 really that different to the D700? So they both share a Panasonic manufactured Nikon designed sensor, which once again proves that Panasonic knows how to make some good fucking sensors. This sensor in both these cameras was actually the only one produced by Panasonic for Nikon before they moved to Sony for sensor production, after which the cameras got obviously much worse. Alright, so let's compare the D3 to the D700. So these are both shot with the 50mm f1.8D lens, which is a awesome little lens. And these were shot, the ones at the beach were shot with auto white balance, but what I've done is I've actually gone in and set the white balance to be daylight on both cameras. This is the D700 shot, this is a D3 shot. As you can see, daylight on both. And I just ever so slightly adjusted the exposure so they would be the same. If we compare them side by side, they look pretty similar. In fact, I would say they look identical. I really don't notice that much of a difference. Maybe the D700 shot might be a little bit more saturated, I don't know, but you're really splitting your hairs here. Like, they're both incredible. And just in a second, I'm going to show you a comparison with a modern high-resolution camera with a very, very expensive lens, just to show you just how well these ancient, 17-year-old cameras still hold up today. So let's look at another comparison. This is with the 28mm f2.8 AIS, and the D3 is on the left and the D700 on the right. So in this shot here, as you can see, again, very, very similar. Maybe the D700 shot's a little bit less warm, but the white balance was set to be the same. And finally, let's look at one more comparison. So I thought I shot these at 2.8, both of them, but I must have accidentally changed the ISO to 3.2 on the D3 shot. But regardless, this will still show you a good little comparison between the two of them. So D3 on the left, D700 on the right, both with the 51.8D, which again, it's like a 50 USD lens. Like, this is such a crazy good result from such a cheap setup. And look, maybe there is a difference. Maybe the D700 is a little bit warmer, but they're not, you know, the difference isn't that big. I would say that, like, get whichever camera you like ergonomically more. Personally, I love the battery grip on the D3 and I love the way it feels in the hand, but I also like the D700 because if I was to go traveling, for example, I would much rather take the D700 with me. But as you can see, people online that think that the D3 is somehow noticeably worse, I don't really see that. I don't think it's that much worse. Now, one more comparison that I want to show you guys that I think is really interesting to see is when you compare this camera to D700 on the left to a modern high resolution camera with the best 50mm lens I've ever used. So this is the Lumix S1R with the 50mm S Pro 1.4. This is a $2,000 lens. It is commonly described as being a Zeiss Otis with autofocus. It is without a doubt absolute optical perfection. And on the left we have a cheap piece of shit plastic 50mm 1.8 Nikon lens. So both of them were shot at 2.8. Both have cloudy white balance. I did have to slightly up the exposure on the S1R shot because it was a little bit under, but as you can see, white balance is the exact same on both. So we're literally looking, and Adobe color profile as well. So the only difference between these is in the sensor themselves. So you can really see why everyone is so crazy about these D700 colors, because look at how fucking good this looks. I mean, it almost makes the S1R shot just look like really green by comparison. And look, yes, obviously you could do a white balance tweak and you could make this look very similar, but just straight out of camera, I mean, come on, man, how good does this look? And now let's zoom in and you'll just see how wild this is. So look at that, look how sharp that is. That 51.4, this is a 2.8, so it's not even wide open, but one thing that I will say, I want to just point out as well, this 44 megapixels, like, yeah, if you shoot landscapes, it's good, but if you do a lot of portrait work, having all of this resolution, all it does is it gives you more work to have to retouch. You can see everything, every little imperfection in Avalon's skin you can see. And I think that for portraits, it's actually a lot nicer if you're shooting with a camera with a slightly lower resolution, and it's a lot more flattering to your model as well. And just finally, just for curiosity, let me show you what this is at 1.4 on the 51.4. Again, as you can see, still razor sharp even at 1.4, no issues whatsoever. But you just see the bokeh difference between 2.8 and 1.4. So yeah, just crazy. And yes, you could probably throw on some very minor exposure and contrast adjustments and call it a day. But I personally think that the images look even better when you edit them. And I think they look fantastic when you edit them with my presets, which I will link down below, and every purchase helps to support me and this channel. Now, when I was testing out the D200 for the comparison video, the camera felt old, and the CCD sensor inside meant that while it did indeed have really good colors, it was unfortunately plagued by the same problems that affect all CCD sensors. That is, terrible high ISO performance and almost non-existent dynamic range. This D700, on the other hand, with its modern CMOS sensor, well, relatively modern CMOS sensor, while certainly not quite up to the same standard as a modern mirrorless camera, features low light performance that is actually remarkable given its age, with honestly 2500 ISO being totally usable and very clean. I think if I had this camera in 2008, it would have been like magic, seriously. Like, I would say that the low light performance is honestly pretty on par with my 5D Mark III, and that's a camera that came out 4 years later. So that was in 2012. And the autofocus, it's excellent. So old AFD lenses work great, and this camera even features 3D tracking autofocus. Although honestly, I have no idea how any of that works, so I just use the single point and recompose method that I've used on all my other DSLRs, and I faced absolutely no problems. Now, is this going to be as good as a modern mirrorless camera? Of course not. I mean, it's not even close. But for slow moving subjects or portrait work, I see no reason why you couldn't just use this camera today in 2025 and achieve absolutely sensational results. And one more thing that I really love about these Nikon DSLRs is just how great the manual focus experience is with them. So on this D700, I have the incredible 28mm f2.8 AIS lens, and I have a host of older Nikon AI and AIS lenses, and they work absolutely excellent on these cameras. In fact, they're probably some of the best ways to use these lenses because it feels so natural and so native. And what's really cool as well is you have a very easy to use setting in your menu that lets you change if you have a lens without any contacts on it. So like this 28 2.8, for example, I can really easily set it, tell it what the maximum aperture is, and then it actually shows me on the top of the screen when I move the aperture dial. First of all, it gives you EXIF data, proper metering, and everything works great. And then I've got I set up the function button at the front here, so I can just press the button and then I can switch between. So I've got a couple lenses here. I've got the 28, I've got the 105, and I can just flick through that. So when I change the lenses, you just have to remember to change like what lens data you're in, but it's very, very easy to do, and it works really well. But the real star of the show is in this viewfinder. So you see that little dot in the bottom left corner of the screen? That is a focus confirmation dot. And next to it are two arrows, which show you which way to move the focus ring to achieve perfect focus. And this works the exact same way that autofocus works. So you just put the focus point over what you want to confirm focus with, adjust the focus ring until you see that dot appear and hit the shutter. So this makes using manual lenses just a total dream, and the entire experience is superb. And now for the second road trip, we went down to the other side of the bay to Torquay, and we visited Bells Beach, which is a world famous surfing destination, where I used the D3 and D700 together along with the 180mm f2.8 AFD lens to capture stunning photographs of surfers and hang gliders in the distance. And let me tell you, having these two bad boys around my neck felt like I was living the ultimate 2008 dream. With a combined retail price in 2008 of $11,000 for the bodies alone. And 17 years later, I paid just around $1,000 for them both. Depreciation can be a beautiful thing sometimes. Now, you might be thinking, 12 megapixels, that seems awfully low. And look, it's not heaps, I will admit, and you can definitely forget about being able to crop in much. So if you love cropping or printing mega-sized photos, these are certainly not going to be the cameras for you. But if you're just sharing on social media, it's perfectly fine. I've shot with plenty of 10 to 12 megapixel sensor cameras in the past, and I've very rarely had any issues with that small of a resolution. And while this D3 definitely feels like a much more solid camera, it is absolutely massive, heavy, and is actually usually quite a bit more expensive on the used market. And also, seeing as it was a professional's camera, like a proper pro's camera, many of them are really pretty beat up and abused. So my D3 has been heavily used. It's missing this rubber port on the front here as well, which is, I think, quite a common problem. And the shutter count is north of 240,000. But there are plenty of reports online of D3s being able to go 600, 700, 800,000 clicks on a single shutter. So just like an old Land Cruiser, I feel like this thing is barely broken in. The D700, on the other hand, is much lighter, and it features something that the D3 doesn't have, which I really like, a pop-up flash, which alone is really useful, especially for fill flash, or if you want a little bit more of that point and shoot look and you can't be bothered bringing with you an extra little speed light. And because this was more of a prosumer camera, you'll be able to find them with much lower shutter counts. Honestly, in my search for the D3, I basically didn't find a single one with like less than six-figure shutter counts. And the D700 is definitely not built badly at all. It's excellent. It's full magnesium alloy body, fully weather sealed. This thing is built absolutely fantastically, and it definitely feels like it was built to last a very, very long time. The other good thing about the D700 is it does look a lot less imposing and subtle, but to be honest with you, just how bloody loud the shutter is on both these cameras, neither are going to be great cameras for when discretion is key. So this is the D700 and this is the D3. I do like the D3 sound more. It sounds a little bit more like, it just sounds better. Also, one really cool thing about the D3, check out the 9 frames per second burst rate. It's awesome. Really, really cool. And it sounds like a bloody machine gun. So you switch your little thing here to CH, which is continuous high. And now listen to this. Oh, and that's the buff I filled up. So I don't know how many shots that was, but you know, it's really impressive. Now, however, that being said, you know, the D700 can actually get really close to that. So with an 8 frames per second burst rate, should you choose to add a battery grip. But without a battery grip, this is what the burst rate sounds like. Yeah. Not quite the same. Not quite the same at all. And speaking of batteries, oh man, this is the part where it gets really impressive. The battery life on both of these cameras is absolutely amazing. Now, I forgot how good DSLRs were with batteries, given that they have no EVFs and you hardly ever use the display, except, you know, to review images. And with brand new third-party batteries in both of these cameras, I shot over 700 photos on each and it still showed a full battery icon. And then I was curious, I was like, okay, what's the like SIPA rating for these cameras, which is like the official rating that they sort of get. It's usually pretty conservative, but for example, like, you know, a lot of modern mirrorless cameras will have 400 to 500 shots as a rating on the charge. The D700 has a SIPA rating of 1,000 shots per charge. And the D3, holy shit, you're not gonna believe this, a frankly mind-blowing rating of 4,300 shots per charge. 4,300 shots per charge. What? Like, you could go on holiday with this thing and not even need to charge it once. You could use this for like 2 weeks straight and never need to charge it. The D3 does feature a much more complex battery charger and the battery itself is very different. So it's quite a large battery. It looks like this. This is a third-party one. And it's the one thing I did notice that the batteries themselves aren't too hard to get. They're about $30 to $40 each to get a brand new one. So that's not a problem. But the charger itself, they don't really make any like third party. Well, they do make third party ones, but they're very expensive. So I think I was looking at some, they're like $80 for the charger alone. So if you're buying one of these D3s, really make sure that it comes with the charger. Because unlike the D700 where you can find the EN EL3A batteries and the chargers for super cheap, I think it's called the EN EL4A. That charger in the D3 is a little bit more difficult to find. Another big benefit of the D3 over the D700 is that it has dual card slots. Now, even if these cards are stupidly expensive compact flash cards on both cameras, at least the file sizes themselves are really small, so that a 64GB card, which still costs around 70 Australian dollars, can give you around 3,000 to 4,000 raw file capacity. So that's really impressive, and it does mean that for most work, like I think 264GB cards, like I doubt you would ever really need more than that. The dual cards mean that I feel a lot better about using the D3 specifically for pro work, which I actually totally intend to do with it, as I'm just enamored with just how nice the shooting experience and results are from actually honestly both of these cameras. It's like all the benefits of the CCD sensor, like the same kind of really beautiful colors, if anything, honestly nicer colors, but you don't have to deal with a lot of the downsides. The Nikon D700 and by extension the D3 prove that not only do you not need the latest and greatest in cameras to produce good photos, you don't need to spend an arm and a leg on camera gear either. If you're just getting started on a tight budget or just want to experience a sensor with colors that will knock your socks clean off, these cameras offer value for money that is simply unmatched anywhere else. And I strongly urge you to try one out if you can. So, what do you guys think? Have you ever shot with a D700 or a D3? Are they worth the hype? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next week and have a great day.